Hey there, it's Tracie and this acrylic painting tutorial is going to show you how to paint a robin's nest with acrylics on an 11 by 14 inch canvas. Let's go over brushes and colors that we'll be using for this tutorial. We will be using a number 12 break brush, which is like a 1/2 inch flat brush, a 3/4 inch flat wash brush, and a number 4 round brush. So the last two brushes I just showed you are the Princeton Velvet Touch brushes, and the bright brush is a Majestic Royal brush. This is, as far as the colors, we'll do Mars Black, Unbleached Titanium, Turquoise Blue, Burnt Sienna, Hooker's Green, Hue Permanent, Titanium White, Light Pink, Quinacridone Magenta, Raw Umber. These are Liquitex Basics colors. And you'll need a drawing pencil for drawing the nest. There's also an optional traceable that you could print out for this painting. Let's go ahead and get started. I am using a 3/4 flat brush, and we have our paint palette loaded with these three colors: light pink, unbleached titanium, and titanium white. So we are going to paint the entire background of this painting, and it really is a very simple abstract background with these three colors combined together and just blended to create this really pretty pastel background. So there's not really any way you can mess this up. I will say that I recommend adding a little bit extra white to blend with these colors because it needs to be a very, very light pastel color. And you're just basically taking those three colors, you're loading your brush in all three of those colors and just applying it to the canvas. Big angle paint strokes. And it's okay to load your brush with a little bit of water that kind of boosts the flow of that paint, thins it down a little bit, and helps to spread it across the canvas. So it is a very thin first layer of paint. It's such a pretty combination of colors. I love how these colors blend together. So just fill your entire canvas with all three of those colors, big, full width paint strokes. I'm going to get a little bit more white on my palette here because we do need a generous amount of white for this, just to make sure it shows up very, very light. And I'm just going to blend that in there. I like the look of the colors not blending all the way, so you'll have streaks of a brighter color in there, and I'm not going to brush over it multiple times. It's just going to, you can see that a nice combination, different tints of that pink and that beige color. So after this is done, we can use the rest of our colors to paint the sides of the canvas, and you'll want everything to dry before going on to the next step. In this next step, we will be drawing the nest, and there is an optional traceable template if you prefer to trace that onto the canvas, but the nest is such an easy drawing to do. And so we're going to start by drawing this sort of donut shape. So our nest is, we can see the inside because we can see the eggs, but it's kind of turned and angled on its side. So I'm going to start by drawing just a slanted oval, and that's going to be the interior part of the nest. And this donut shape, so the nest is thinner in the back, and then it goes thicker in the front. So when we draw the second oval, we're going to make sure there's more space on the bottom and less space at the top, and that's going to give that sort of like angled donut shape. And then we're going to start to sketch the tree. So this nest is nestled in between two tree branches. So you're just going to kind of draw this first branch, and it's just slightly under the bottom of the nest. It goes down, and then it reaches to the lower left corner. So this is the big branch, and it splits to the left. So the nest is in this corner between two branches, and this branch just kind of goes off the canvas. In yours, your branch might look different than mine depending on how you drew the nest. So you're just going to have to kind of adjust your branches around the nest. There's a smaller branch that kind of goes up to the right of the nest. And that is all we need for the drawing portion. We just have the basic composition of the nest and the branches laid out. and we can start painting this in. I'm going to load my paint palette with the color Mars Black and use the number 12 bright brush, which is that 1/2 inch flat brush. You can also just use the round brush for this. And the first step for painting this is actually really easy. We're going to do the center of the nest. So this is the darkest part of the nest. It's pure black. And I'm just going to a little bit of water on there just to kind of thin that black down a little bit and just paint that entire interior shape of that oval on the inside of the nest. Next, I'm going to load my paint palette with the color Raw Umber. This is a really dark brown color, and I'm not going to rinse my brush for this. I'm actually going to take that black that's already on my brush, or if you rinsed your brush already, just mix a little bit of black into your Raw Umber. And this is going to be we're going to paint the outer part of the nest, that donut shape on the outer part. So it should show up. So the inside is very, very dark. This part is also dark, but we can still see that it's still lighter than the pure black, so it should still show up. We want the base of our nest to be very, very dark. And I just contradicted myself and added just a teeny bit of white in there. And I'm just going to let that little teeny bit of white kind of blend with this brown, but it still should be a very, very dark layer because we're going to be layering on lighter twig texture over this first dark layer, and it's going to look really pretty, and our nest is going to look three-dimensional, and it's going to really pop. So notice how I'm painting this. I'm going in that kind of circular direction, and it's already forming this sort of like donut shape. I keep referring my nest to a donut for some reason. And see how that little bit of white just kind of gave it just a bit of depth already. And also the direction of my paint strokes. See how they're kind of going curved tire. It looks like a tire shape. And all solid. There's no nest texture right now. This is just the first layer. Before we can do anything to this, we got to let it dry. And I am going to paint the first layer of my tree next. I'm going to rinse my brush, get all that color rinsed off, and we're going to do the tree branch. The first layer I'm going to do for the tree branch is all Mars Black, and you can add a little bit of water in there to kind of loosen that black. Sometimes that helps when painting branches, is if your paint's just a little bit thinner, it flows better. So our branch is thicker right here, the lower left corner area. You can take the edging and kind of make the edge of the branch a little bit wavy instead of straight. And then right here, this branch goes off to the left. So for these smaller branches, I'm holding the brush kind of horizontally to get the thinner stroke, and then for bigger parts you use the full width of the brush. So you kind of change the angle of the bristles depending on what you're painting. So we do see part of the branch under the nest, but it's still a thin area. When we paint the nest texture, some of that might be overlapping the branch later. So this goes very thin under the nest, and then it goes up and off the edge of the canvas. We have this other little branch that's kind of sticking up to the right of the nest. So I'm going to take this kind of triangle going upwards, and then this is going to go up. So see how I'm using the edge of the bristles, and I release the pressure, and that gets your paint stroke to go thinner. So press a little bit hard at first and release the pressure. You get your branch to go thin. You do another little guy over here. You can adjust your tree branch differently to from how you drew it. You don't have to fill the lines in exactly, and then you can add, so right here, actually adding a little bit of kind of wavy edging to the bottom of that branch, but then I'm going to take this, have it kind of extend outwards for another little branch. Let's rinse our brush off and add the color Burnt Sienna. So this is a lighter sort of reddish brown color. And I'm going to add the first layer of texture to the nest. So I'm going to take this reddish brown and actually add that raw umber into it to darken that brown. We are going to add so many layers of texture on this nest, but we have to work dark to light. So it's tempting to do your lighter layer now, but we can't do that until we do all these dark and medium layers. So it's almost not even visible at this point, but you can see what I'm doing here with the edge of my brush, little kind of curvy, angled twigs. You can even take some of these and kind of make them go outside the lines of that shape, but it's still super dark. But we don't want to cover all of that first layer. We still want to keep it dark. There's some black that kind of went into that color as I was mixing it on the palette, and that's okay. So go around, so curvy, thin paint strokes, and you're starting to form the texture of the nest. You could leave your branch pure black if you want to simplify things, but I'm going to add some texture to my branch next. So kind of the same concept, only these are just kind of looser, longer paint strokes. This is that dark color, that burnt sienna and the raw umber, and I'm just gently brushing over my branch. So the part directly under the nest should be left dark and shadowy, but I'm mostly doing this kind of on the sides of the branches, and this is starting to give my branch a little bit more depth. I'm going to next add a little bit of that Unbleached Titanium to my palette and mix that in with that dark brown color that I've been using. And now I'm going to do like a layer of lighter color on the top parts of the branch, because the light would be hitting the top and we'll just say the left side of the branches, but we're leaving the bottom parts of the branches and the right side of the branches dark for shadow purposes, and directly under the nest, that one is left for shadow, so dark. And just loosely let that kind of blend in with your medium brown color, and that gives your tree branch some bark texture. I'm going to take a little bit more of that Unbleached Titanium and just gently blend that in, just the very, very top of this branch and this one as well. We just don't want it to get too light to where it just blends in with the background too much. It still needs to be relatively dark. Just a little bit more of this on the far edges of these branches. Next, we are going to paint the eggs. So ideally, everything around the nest should be dry. If it's not, it might bleed a little bit too much into the white, but that might be fine. It just shouldn't be soaking wet, if that makes sense. So we're just going to take our number 4 round brush and titanium white. And we're going to paint 3 eggs. So keep in mind, we see the eggs, but we don't see the full eggs. So they're kind of, bottom parts of them are kind of hidden. You're just going to have to kind of imagine what they would look like. Like maybe this one we can almost see the full egg. So these two are angled opposite from each other. And then we'll do one behind those two. So this one maybe right here. There's a little bit of brown that's kind of bleeding into that white, but that's okay. This is just the first layer. And when this dries, we'll paint them turquoise. Painting them white first is going to make sure that they show up super bright and pretty. So we'll need to let that dry before we can paint the turquoise color over them. And I am going to add my next layer of texture to my nest. So I'm going to use my round brush this time to do that. I'm going to take burnt sienna and mix some unbleached titanium and raw umber into it. We basically, again, we're working from dark to light. So think about your last layer you just did. It's like a medium brown. This one, let's just make it a couple shades lighter. See how it shows up. You might want to kind of like experiment with that. Maybe add a little bit more of the beige color in there if it needs to lighten. But this should not be our lightest layer yet. It's just our next lightest color up. And this time I'm using the round brush instead of the bright brush. And I'm still kind of doing the same thing. Very loose, kind of curved lines going in the direction to create the nest shape. So they're curving around that shape. They can go outside the lines of the shape. I'm not going to do any overlapping over my eggs yet. We can do that later after we paint the eggs in turquoise. This round brush is creating a different kind of stroke than that the bright brush was, a little bit thicker, and then more, you're able to get wavier paint lines with the round brush. So we could leave the entire interior blank, or we can take some of this really dark brown, and this still needs to be dark. So if we painted that light brown at all, we would kind of lose that depth of the inside of the nest. So I just did a few sort of paint strokes inside a little bit over the black with a dark brown, but I'm going to leave it like that. I'm not going to add anything else. It needs to stay super dark and shadowy on the inside of the nest. For the next nest layer, I'm actually not going to let this dry. And if any of this kind of blends with the other layer, that's fine as long as it's not blending too much. But I'm going to mix my next brown. So I'm going to take the brown that I just used and add a little white to it. And that's going to lighten this up. And this is going to create my next layer for the nest. As you're painting each of these lighter layers, you're going to do less and less. So with the lighter colors, you don't need as much, and you want a lot of that dark still showing through. So I'm not going to add as much of this lighter brown as I did previous layer. These are just very thin, curvy strokes that wrap around the nest. And we're trying not to lose all of our dark. So we can still see so many layers through this lighter layer, or in between the paint strokes. Now I'm going to add more lighter color. So let's take some more white, mix that into that color. I'm twisting the brush, and that really helps to distribute that paint right there on the end of the bristle. So see how much lighter this is compared to our first layer. It's super bright, but I'm doing less of this than that previous layer. So little paint strokes that cross each other and curve and wrap around the nest. They can go outside the lines. For color variation purposes, I'm actually taking this burnt sienna, that's that reddish color, adding light to it. So it's still lighter, it's just like a light red brown instead of a light beige brown. And I'm just kind of wrapping some more of that color around the nest. And I'm just going to keep going with this. So more of the reddish brown, that burnt sienna color, layering on more of this brown. Without covering all of my previous layers. And get some white and mix some white into this. So maybe have some more branches that are kind of hanging off the edge. You can be as wild or as neat as you want with this nest. If you like the wild look, you can have more branches hanging off the edge. Maybe some of these little twigs split off into different branches. So like this one, see how it kind of splits off like a little Y. Maybe some of these are going this way. So it gives a little bit more variety in our nest texture. The next thing we're going to do is add the color Turquoise Blue to our palette. So this is the color I'm going to do for the robin's eggs. And use a clean number 4 round brush to paint the eggs. So we're just going to do solid turquoise at first, and we'll layer on our shadowing and white later. Or actually, we'll do a little bit before this dries. But for now, let's just do solid color, because that makes things a little bit easier at first in this one. So you just want to be careful. So I'm actually going to do a teeny bit of black right here, just because I don't want this egg behind it to disappear and you can't see where it stops and ends. And also it would be a little bit shadowy right here. So add a teeny tiny bit of black and then kind of blend that so it's a little bit of a shadow right behind that front egg. And then the rest, you pretty much outline the shape of the egg and then fill it in. Kind of curved paint strokes that kind of form the shape. We'll make these look a little bit more three-dimensional when we add some highlighting to them. And then, so this one, fill it in by outlining it, and then big curved strokes that kind of go in the direction of the shape of the egg. Before this dries, I'm going to do the first layer of highlighting. So without rinsing the brush, grab titanium white, and then on the edge of the egg, so like this egg edge right here, I'm going to blend a little bit of that lighter color in there. And this isn't going to be our brightest highlight. We'll get brighter in some areas as this dries. And then on the top edges of both of these eggs as well, a little bit of light, kind of drag it down and blend with the rest. And then I'm going to take that white and in this little area, and then on this top edge, and just kind of drag it down. So our eggs are starting to look a little bit more three-dimensional. And then right here, I'm actually going to add the highlight. Instead of it being on the edge of the egg, I'm going to have it be kind of in the middle area. So I'm just going to do these kind of dabbed paint strokes, kind of forming this kind of blobbed area in the middle, and that's going to make it look like it's kind of shiny right there in the top middle of the egg instead of right on the edge of that egg. So you're brightening that with the white. It is still blending with that wet turquoise. Add a little bit more. That might have over blended just a little bit, but we will, when this dries, we can add more to it. But see how adding that white kind of in the top middle area gave it a little bit of a shiny look. I'm going to actually do some more shadowing with this. So for your shadow color, you want to mix turquoise with a teeny tiny bit of black. So that will get you your turquoise shade. And then down here, we would have shadow because part of that nest would be kind of overlapping some shadow color. And then down here as well. And we already added shadow right here, but I'm just going to add a little bit more. I'm just doing these dabbed sort of paint strokes, letting that blend with the rest of that egg. And then if you want to kind of touch up the edges of these eggs, you take black and just kind of redo the negative space around them. That's what I'm doing here. I'm just taking the black, going back around the edges, maybe a little bit more shadow like right here, because that egg is behind this front egg. And next we're going to start painting these really pretty blossoms. And so we're going to use the color Quinacridone Magenta and light pink and titanium white, and just a combination of those three colors to create these really pretty blossoms. I don't know if they're cherry blossoms or peach blossoms, nectarine blossoms, whatever kind of blossoms you envision. They're just really pink flowers. And I'm going to start with the buds. The buds are super easy because they're just little ovals and they haven't opened yet. So this is just going to be pure Quinacridone Magenta using the 4-round brush, doing little ovals on the ends of these branches. And before that dries, I'm going to take my light pink and in like 1 or 2 strokes, just kind of drag that light pink down from the top down. And that'll give you this two-toned look to your little flower bud. And then for the other flowers, these are going to be little 5-petaled flowers. So they're rounded petals, and each one just kind of slightly overlaps the other one. And I am double loading my brush in both the light pink and magenta, and just letting both of those colors kind of blend together as I paint each of these petals. I'm going to kind of make the petals distinct and not blend in too much together, but we can add detail highlighting to that later. So there's one blossom. I'm going to do another one. So again, they're just rounded petals, 5 petals in each one, just kind of slightly overlaps the next one. And you can position your flowers differently and have them be in different areas of the canvas. This is just what I chose, where I chose to put my blossoms. I'm going to do another one down here. And these are floating right now, so they are not touching any of the branch. We'll paint little branches that are attached to these blossoms later, so it's okay that they are just kind of floating in the air. I'm going to do another blossom up here, but this one's going to be kind of a bud style, but a little bit more open, so these spread out a little bit wider than those other buds that we painted. I'm going to take some white, drag some white on the top of this. And then I'm going to go back and kind of define my petals for my flowers a little bit more. Rinse the brush off, grab white and light pink. So it's not pure white, it's just a very light pink color. And I want to go and kind of outline the edges of the petals, but then kind of drag that color down. So I want my flower to be darker in the center. I want it to be lighter on the edges of the petals. So we're outlining the edge and then just kind of dragging it down towards the center. So I'm going to do the same thing to this one. Just going to outline the edge, kind of drag it down. So when you outline the edge of the petal, it gives it more definition. So you can decide how they're overlapping. I'm going to do the same thing to this one. Outline the edge and drag it down. Next, we are going to rinse the brush off and add green to our painting. So load your paint palette with Hooker's green hue and have a nice rinsed off number 4 round brush. So we're going to do some leaves that are kind of attached to the bottom of the buds of the flowers, assuming they're dry by now. If they're not dry, you'll have to kind of wait for them to dry to do this step. I'm going to get a little bit more of the Unbleached Titanium on my palette because I'm going to mix the green with that beige color to kind of lighten it up. And actually, I'm going to start right here on the nest. I'm going to do these little tiny leaves. It just adds a really pretty pop of color. If you don't want any green in your nest, you can leave it alone, but I'm just doing little kind of curved oval paint strokes for little leaves that are just kind of wrapped inside of the nest. And then, let's see, we can do a big leaf right here. So these are floating, they're not, we'll do the stems later. So big kind of rounded, pointed leaf. These guys have little leaves, little rounded leaves. And then little leaves that kind of overlap the bottom of these flower buds. And then I'm going to do, let's see, bigger leaf down here. Maybe this one's going this way. This one's going this way. So you can mix your green with more of that beige color to get some lighter tones in there and more pure green for dark. I like to add color variation in my leaves without blending it all the way. So this, the left side of this leaf, I added a little bit more beige, and the right side, it's a little bit darker. So same with these ones. A little bit of beige. The beige acts as a highlight to that green. And then a little bit more pure green on the bottom. I'm going to next work a little bit more on the middle part of these flowers. I'm going to take black and a teeny bit of black and the magenta and just kind of outline the middle part of the edges of those petals to give it a little bit more dark in the middle of the flower. So just right here, just the bottom part of the petals, and maybe drag a little bit of that darker color on the bottom. We want the middle part of the flowers to be much darker. I'm going to do this as well, a little bit on the bottom. Rinse the brush, and let's do little black dots in the middle of the flowers. So I'm going to pinch my bristles because these are little tiny black dots just in the middle of our flowers. Next, I'm going to paint the stems for these blossoms so they're not just floating anymore. So I'm going to take green, maybe add a little bit of black to it, so it's a little bit darker green, and do the base. So this flower has some green that's overlapping the base of that flower bud. I'm going to turn this into more of a brown. So without rinsing, grab the raw umber. So that green and raw umber are mixing, and that's going to form a little stem that goes all the way down to the nest. And then 2 little stems to have those leaves attached. And then these 2 little flowers, little stems, and no leaves for those. We'll just kind of keep that simple. And I'm going to take this brown and actually do little speckles on the robin's eggs. So this is just brown, and I'm just kind of pressing down my brush and doing little brown dots kind of all throughout the eggs. And then these leaves get little stems, and then a little stem attached to this flower. Next, I'm going to add some more highlighting onto my eggs. So I'm going to rinse my brush all the way and grab pure titanium white. So remember earlier we kind of did this like dabble thing in the middle top part of the eggs, and it kind of made it look 3-dimensional. We're going to make it pop even more by adding a brighter layer. So I'm just taking this and kind of dabbling in the top middle area of the egg, and that gives my egg a little bit more of a shiny texture. And you're only stippling that. That means painting little dots to create that. I'm going to take turquoise and white, so this is kind of like a medium color. Maybe do a little bit on the outside part of the highlights on some of these to give it kind of a middle color. So it's not just pure white, there's some white and turquoise. So it's kind of like a lighter turquoise. We kind of went backwards with that. We could have done the medium turquoise and then layered on light as we went, but that's okay. So small paint strokes. Next, I'm going to do another layer on my nest. So this is going to be my lightest color. I'm going to take beige and white. So it's not pure white. It's a very light beige color. I'm going to water it down slightly and twist my brush. So these little nest lines are going to be very thin, and I'm going to try to make these a little bit more twisty. And I'm not going to do as much because it's such a bright color. I don't want to lose my contrast of those dark layers. So I'm just going to add these in there very subtly. And I'm going to make them a little bit more twisty. So some are hanging off the edge. See how they're a little bit more wavy and rugged than those other ones. I'm going to rinse and then add a little tiny bit of black. So I'm going to do just a few wavy little black pieces in the nest, kind of in between some of the other ones. These are very thin and wavy lines. And then the last detail I'm going to do are the little vein lines on the leaves. So I'm going to take my black and mix that into green. I just want like a really dark green and kind of loosen it up and twist my brush because I'm going to do a line right down the middle of this big leaf. Very, very thin line down the middle. And then these vein lines going outwards. I'll do 2 on each side. Maybe outline the left side of the leaf. And then this one also gets a line down the middle. And then 2 or 3 lines going diagonally outwards. I'm going to take green and white. This actually ended up looking more like green-gray. So I'm just adding a little bit of light outline over on the left side of this leaf. We could add the vein lines to these leaves up here, but actually I decided to keep them simplified. So I'm not going to do more vein texture on those. And this is the conclusion of how to paint a robin's nest. Sign your name, show it off. Thanks for watching, and thanks for painting with me.